been thinking about something and I wanted to tell you about it. Well, am I glad to see you? I'd actually been thinking about it a lot recently. Specifically magic, because my buddy Orville, he's a magician. And there's a lot of argument in the world about the believability of magic, whether or not it can even be a real thing. And for me, magic is strange. I've heard about all sorts of different things and all sorts of spiritual, strange subjects. Like, pretty sure I've heard something about remnant being uttered here and there. But that's here nor there. I don't really understand any of that. What I do understand is card games. And the card games have been getting really popular recently. For example, it's something to do with magic, I believe. But I've been seeing some of the kids' older brothers and sisters playing it in the big kids section of the restaurant. And I thought it was interesting, and I had a closer look every once in a while, and they would show me the ropes, and I gotta say, card games have been getting really complicated. Back in my day, we used to just play blackjack and poker and go fish and tiddlywinks or whatever. And it's interesting how complicated modern things can really get. Like, have you ever tried to use a computer? Of course you have. It's a part of your job, but there's so much to do. You open the menus and it just hits you with a wave of options. All sorts of little applications, I believe they're called. That, programs. Just you can watch moving pictures. You can listen to music. It's insane. I couldn't believe my eyes. What's next, right? Anyway, so I was also thinking about where was I? Hey, you know what? Maybe it'll come back to me later. I'll see you around. Man, am I glad to see you. I was thinking recently. We being a children's entertainment restaurant, I think the company should branch into toys. I thought that was an interesting subject, and I thought you could bring it up to your boss, because looking at the children and seeing the toys they bring in, all sorts of wonderful, colorful figurines and collectible action figures and marketable characters. I've thought to myself, a lot has changed between now and when me and Orville grew up back in the 40s. See, back then, safety standards were subpar. And this was made very obvious by a lot of sectors, but more importantly, children's toys were awfully strange. Now, I'd had a lot of arguments with Orville about this kind of stuff. Specifically, we had this toy set, and it was weird. Orville came from a wealthy family, and they could afford all sorts of expensive doodads and doohickeys and thingamabobs and what, and he had this set that was specifically for playing with atoms, I believe. It was something with nuclear science. He was a big fan of this stuff. And you see, at first it sounds interesting because, children love learning. Learning is one of the most wonderful things you can do. I love learning every day. I love sharing my stories because learning is just one of the most beautiful. It's wonderful. It's just a magical thing. But Orville, he wasn't in it for the learning. He was in it for the other part of nuclear science, making the explosions and all those things. So he bought this. His parents bought him this set, and we'd been playing with it in his backyard at the mansion. And he was sitting, looking at it. He was like, "Hey, Orville," I'm sorry. He was like, "Hey, Hippo, look at this. Check this out." And he showed me, and he put I believe it was some blue rock. And he put it up to another one, and it created this this beautiful, bright blue. And we thought, at first it was wonderful, and then we fell deathly ill. And it turns out, a couple weeks later, after we'd already played with the toy over and over again, the toy had been recalled because the scientists up at the stop had discovered that radiation isn't safe. And scientists are wonderful people. I think about scientists all the time. Scientists can be wonderful, wonderful people. For example, the fellas that brought to the moon, me and Orville, we actually watched the moon landing on live television. When it happened, it was a triumph. It was one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It was just a beautiful triumph. a sight to behold. And Orville thought he's always been a bit of a skeptic. He told me, they're just doing this so they can beat the Russians. They were trying to tell the Russians, yeah, we won. And I told him, Orville, you're kind of a negative Nancy. Yeah, you're not really like everything I've ever told you. You've always had some kind of skeptic to it, and it's been, why are you like this? And he just shrugged. Sometimes I reevaluate what I think about that man. I think he's got a good heart, but he's a character for sure. Anyway, I'll see you later. I need to go use the bathroom. Oh, you're just the night guard I wanted to see. How you doing? I'm doing. I've been a little stressed out actually. I've been thinking about the video game sponsors that we've had. The guys that bring in the console for kids' birthdays and such to play games. And normally, I'm not bothered by this, but, it's I've seen some of the stuff that the children have played, and some of it's relatively fine, building block games and other such sorts, and there's sometimes, every once in a while, I'll see them playing some kind of shooting game, like violent video games, and it doesn't feel right in these halls, in the halls of our restaurant in this company. Fazbears and murder just don't go together. It's not right. We're a family restaurant for kids and grown-ups alike. That I forget the line, but it's a wonderful place to feel safe and not really think about these sorts of things. I don't know. I just don't feel right about it. Well, anyway, speaking of concern for the children, have you seen the pizzas that they've been serving recently? I've been looking at the menu, and I actually went behind the kitchen to check it out. Some of the ingredients there have been there for a little longer than I think is safe, honestly. I really think they should address that as soon as possible. That could lead to some problems down the line. But who am I to say? I'm not really one who eats pizza, nor much of anything, really, given that I'm, a robot, I suppose. But, Well, anywho, I've got to run some errands, so I'll see you around.
Well, hey there. Isn't it fancy catching you here? It's been a while since we've last spoken. How's the job treating you? Things going well? Thinking about meeting up with old friends after a while. I met up with my old friend Montgomery Gator. People know him as Monty, is his stage name for that whole Rockstar gig. But ever since he picked up that Rockstar gig, he never really had time for any of his old friends or hanging out. And, I was okay with this. However, the other day, he'd called me and asked, "Hey, Monty, I mean Hippo, you wanna catch up and go fishing?" Now, of course, I couldn't say no to that, so I packed my fishing gear. I put it on the back of the truck, and I drive over to where he said to meet up, which was this old shack a couple counties over. Now, I don't know why he'd asked me to drive so far, but the old shack was stationed right next to this old pond, really big pond, and he'd stated that it was a very, very good pond for fishing. But I digress. So I drive over. I meet him over at the old shack. Creepy old shack it was. Covered in mold, the wood was barely holding together, and there was spider webs everywhere. And I'd asked him, "Hey, Monty, is this your shack?" And I assume he didn't hear me, because instead of answering my question, he looked over to me and held up this big burlap sack he was carrying. And he said, "Hey, Hippo, could I get a quick hand chucking this here bag of compost into the pond?" Now, of course, not much of a botanical man myself, so I had to ask, "Well, why would you need to fertilize a pond? Nothing's growing in there." And Monty, he looked over to me, looked away, looked over to me again, looked at the bag, looked at me, and he said, "Well, there's seaweed at the bottom of the pond here, and it's good for the fish." And of course, who am I to question a man who's grown up around bodies of water his whole life? So I obliged and helped him chuck the bag into the river, but I couldn't help but notice these two lumps on the bag. kind of reminded me of Rabbity as they did, so I asked her, "Hey, Auntie, why is the bag so lumpy?" And he responded, I thought a dead animal or something. Yeah, dead rabbit. A little rabbit got into the bag. It's, it happens every once in a while, but carcasses are good for the pond. Now, again, I'm not one to question my friend's knowledge, so I just wave it off and help him chuck it into the pond. And, almost at the very moment the bag touches the water, he looks over to me and he's like, "Hey, thanks, wonderful help. I gotta go now. Now." And, I chime in. I say, "Well, weren't we here to go fishing?" And, he looks over to me and he says, "Well, I forgot my fishing rod." And, I point over to the spare that I bring just in case, my rod snaps. And, he scratches the back of his head and responds, "Well, there's no fish left in the water. There's a fish pandemic." And, again, not really wanting to question my friend's knowledge, so I shrug and get back in the truck and drive home. And, looking back on it, Monty was acting awfully neurotic that day. He was looking over his shoulder all the time and asked me if I had been followed. And, a lot of mannerisms that actually reckon back to old Pig Patch. He's an interesting character, a great friend, but, actually, speaking of the devil, I just looked at my watch and I gotta go help Pig Patch get the bugs out of his garden. Bugs as in microphones. He believes there's microphones in the garden. Something about the Fazbear Company getting him for discovering this Fazgoo thing. Not quite sure what he's on about, but once again, I'm not one to question my friends, and I think I'd rather just help him out. So, I'll see you around.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something? Alright, where was I? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something? Alright, where was I? Not really one for stories, are you?